Hey, thanks for joining anybody who's here today. I'm just going to drop the GitHub repo in the bottom down here. If you do want to have a look at the code for this repo, it is up on GitHub already, so feel free to have a look, have a play, submit a PR, add an issue, whatever you might like to do. So today we're carrying on with our Laravel Basics, let's build a startup. So last time we did a lot of work on static pages like the home and the about page and that sort of thing, just kind of structurally building out what we want it to look like and how we want to incorporate the brand a little bit. We started creating like a migration and models for podcasts. And then we started looking at how we were going to actually work with that podcast itself. So let me go to where we were. We have this. We have a nice little page where we're going to have our main hero option here is kind of call to action, which is meant to catch people's attention and ask them to join the beta or just sign in. Some popular podcasts that we've got on the platform. List of features will eventually go here. Then it'll be podcasts of the month, which is going to be a extra feature that we add on for podcast authors to pay to promote a little bit more. Oh, hey, how you doing, buddy? And then just a few little stats going on down the bottom, a testimonial and the footer. Nothing too fancy on that one. Then we go to the about page and we got a nice little mission statement, some stats on the startup itself, a little quote from the founder. Then the team goes underneath that. And funnily enough, I'm actually using this exact layout on my company website at work. So that's pretty cool. And then right down the bottom again, we've got another call to action. Then I believe we did pricing. Yes, we did. So we did pricing. So it's a simple kind of one-off flat fee sort of thing, pricing model. We were going to go for a monthly and an annual with tiered systems, but it made a lot more sense just to do it all very flat pricing because, pay, get access to features, nice and simple. Hey, Thomas. Oh, eating Rice Krispies has. It's got to be, 9, almost 10 o'clock over there in Finland. Then we've got some frequently asked questions in the pricing. And then, again, call to action, which, as you can see, is it's an inverted version of what's on the about page. And that was all one blade component where you can kind of say, I want this branded or I just want it plain, and it will just kind of flip between the two. And that's all we really did in terms of the UI. So if we come back to our README, for example, what we're going to start with is we're going to add an additional field to the podcast for the website, because I'd like to kind of be able to pull in some meta information about the podcast itself. So I'm going to pull in the website perhaps, and that's going to mean that I'm creating a dispatchable job, fetching any podcast information from like Open Graph data on the website. Then we're going to be looking at data transfer object factories, and then data transfer objects themselves. And we're going to create some dispatchable jobs for fetching podcast information. Then we're going to have like an artisan command which will fetch podcast episodes, because what we want this to kind of just be kind of polling in the background on the server side, really, don't we? So back to Notion. I've done a little bit of event storming in the best way that I could on Notion. Usually you get lots of different sticky notes and you'd color coordinate them. But for now, I'm just going to use embedded task lists on here. So the idea is that when a new user registers, two things will happen. The user saved into the database and a verification email sent to the user so it can verify their email. And then when a user registers the podcast, we're going to have a series of events happening. I actually use my own package Bear has. So has asked if I use Sparsy's package. I have used it in the past, and before PHP 8, I definitely would have recommended it. But with PHP 8, I don't need it. But I like to do things my own way a lot of the time, if I'm completely honest. I use a lot of Sparsy packages anyway. But for something like a DTO, I don't think I need it. So when a user registers their podcast, we save it to the database. A job's dispatched, fetching some information about the podcast itself. But at the same time, another job is dispatched, starting to fetch the podcast episodes. And when we've got the episodes, we're going to send an email to the podcast author, letting them know that the podcast is now syncing with the platform. And then also we're going to send a notification to the admin saying that, there's a new podcast. And then if the user follows, we're going to save it to the database, email both parties, and same with subscribers as well. Event storming, play on words. No, it's an actual term. Event storming is a workshop-based method. Basically, it's a planning part of what you have for event sourcing and DDD. The idea is you start with an interaction, so a user registers, and you start to look at what actions and what events are triggered from that simple action, kind of like behavior-driven development a little bit. So you're planning out the behavior patterns a little bit more. I actually learned it from Bo Simonson, really smart guy I know over in Canada who knows a lot about DDD and event sourcing and seeker and all the popular words basically. So first things first, let's open up Table Plus and let's see how we're looking with our database. Where are we? Let's open this and just bring this into view. Go to a blank page and let's drag this over so people can see. So what we've got podcasts. So what do we have on here? We've got feed URL. So we've already got part of it. We've got the external URL already. So I'm going to move this in front of Notion because it's a bit more important. And we're going to move the code this side. So we don't actually need to add the additional field. So we can drop that and we can bring that back a level. So we need to create a dispatchable job for fetching podcast info. So if you remember last time, we aren't storing a lot in our app because this is the application part of our system. And what we're doing instead, we're going domain-driven design. So I've created a source folder and our domains within here. So we've got our catalog domain and our shared domain currently. So within our catalog domain, this is where our jobs are going to be stored. So because I haven't fixed the generators, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a job. So we're going to PHP artisan make a job, and we're going to do that. What should we call that? Fetch metadata for podcast. Nice and lengthy in name. So we'll grab that. So now we can just come down here and within our catalog, we can just create a new folder. We can create a new jobs there, and we will just move that into there. Don't ask me again. If I move it, I want to move it. Try not to make mistakes. So we'll declare strict types because I'd like to catch the edge cases. I like to know when they're going to fail. So we are in Casta domains, catalog, not models, but we are in jobs. So I'm going to fix this to be PSR 12 compliant, which states that traits should be 1 per line, just because I like certain PSRs. And let's just order those into size order because that's how I like them. I don't actually think we need the constructor right now. We'll see. We'll see what we need to pass into this. We probably will need it. The lag's back. It shouldn't. Don't say that to me. Don't say that to me. Oh, I'm never going to forgive you if you keep teasing me like this. All right, let's just drop that as well. So let's clear some of this. So what are we doing with this specific fetch metadata for podcast? What we're going to want to do, we're going to want to pass through two things. I like to keep things relatively small when I'm passing things to a job that's going to dispatch in the background. So we're going to want the public integer for the podcast ID, and we're going to want the string for the external URL. So we're going to pass both of those in, and then we're going to need a package. So if I come back to here, I'm listing out the packages I'm going to use. There's an Open Graph data package, which is pretty good, which I've used quite a few times before. So if we just go find this, I can't pronounce this person's name. I won't even try to cobble it together. But it is a very good package for fetching metadata from like Open Graph. So I shall pull that in. That is in, which is what we wanted. So let's go back to the docs a moment. So all you need to do on this is just Open Graph fetch. What it will do, it will just pull back an array of all of the meta parts from the URL you pass through, basically. So you could pass it a specific page, or you could ask for all of them, and you'll literally get every single one that's been registered. If you don't pass the second argument, you'll just get the basic ones. So I like to get all of them because I'm a bit funny like that. So we'll just do this. We'll just import Open Graph, and what's this complaining about? Non-static method fetch. Okay, so this means we need to just use the alias. It's an alias, so we'll do that. It's probably going to complain now, but we'll see. We shall see. Right, so the fetch is going to take two arguments. Let's go look at how this is built. Exception handling. Okay, so let's come to Open Graph facade. Open Graph facade. Does this auto register, or is it something that I've got to do? It's got an alias. We'll play. Let's just go look at the fetch, and let's see. So we've got a URL and all meta. That is the two arguments we need to pass through. So we'll have the URL, which is going to be this external URL, and then what is going on with my typing today? I haven't had that long a day. And then all meta is going to be true. So this will give us lots of data. So what we'll do, we'll just array it out, and we'll say take some data. And in the background, we'll start Ray up. Here's Ray, our friend little debugger. So let's look at it. We haven't added anything in our database yet, which is fine. We will just have to test some of this. Have I installed? Is there a Laravel Helper that I need to install for Ray? I think there is. I don't know if I've installed it yet, to be honest. Documentation. And all I need is getting started. Install the free package in your app. That's what I'm looking for. And I'm looking for the Laravel version. I don't know if it's just me, but the Sparsity website has been quite slow for me recently. And I'm just going to require this in dev because I don't want it on my production environment. There we go. We've now got Ray. That has now fixed that. So what we're going to do is we'll also open Invoker because why not use all the tools? Right, and Invoker is here in the background. Let's move that over there. Open a local project, and we are going to use Castor. Excellent. So here's our models within our domains. It's also detecting those. What else? What other options have we got? We can run commands, mails, notifications, jobs and events. We can come to the job itself and we can give it a podcast ID, an external URL, and we can actually just dispatch it from here. It is super helpful if you if you're in this like early stage where you're tweaking and you're playing with things a little bit. So what I would do, I am going to complaining about Open Graph. Okay, I'm going to do it a different way. I am going to import the class. And we're just going to say new Open Graph fetch. There you go. Let's just fix that issue there. Got an extra license of Invoker for me, Steve. Now I pay monthly for that one. It's I found it really useful so far, if I'm completely honest. At first, I was a little bit unsure because I use Tinkerwell a lot. But because Invoker comes with Tinkerwell in it, it was like, well, it's a no-brainer. Right. Let's create something. So if I come over to models, if I go to catalog podcast, have I got a user yet? That is the question. I have got a user, me, number one. Right, okay, so let's just create one of these. So we're just going to put a fake one in there. We're going to call this full stack radio. Oh no, that's a category, wrong one. Podcast. Here we go. Let's create our podcast. The owner is me. Category, well, we don't have any categories. This is where you need to be careful about how you build up your data. I haven't used Halo. Is that how you're meant to say it? We'll just create a test category for now. It was created. Right, podcast. Let's create a podcast quickly. This one. Full stack radio. Transistor.fm. This will be updated. The author I know is Adam Wathen, and we will copy that into that next field. ENUS, external URL. So this is fullstackradio.com. Now stop saying that, Has. It is not back, and I'm not going to believe you when you say that the lag is back. Where was this data stored? Where did I store that full stack radio stuff? Tell you what, we'll go get it again. Right, RSS. So we're just going to copy that link. I'm going to open it in another tab so I can just. I think I need to open it in Firefox or something. No, I might just have to pull it out another way. Actually, no, all I need is the URL, right? feed URL, bam. Image owner. Let's see if it'll let me create it. Let's just do that. We'll do so many buttons. Hey, we've got one. Okay, so now we can actually go back to our jobs and events. So podcast ID 1 and external URL, https fullstackradio.com. So in theory, your event was dispatched. Cool. I was hoping to see it in Ray. Okay, we may have to do it another way. How could we do this? Let's try this way. Dispatch. Hey, so here we go. We've got an array back. We've got stuff. Yeah, I think it was something to do with how Firefox handles the GPU stuff, but it's not happening anymore. Like, I'm not using Ray at the minute, so I'll just close that down. So this is everything we've got back. We've got literally everything back. So what we will do is we'll swap back to false so we can see the difference. Dispatch. Hey. So we get URL, type, site name, description, title, and an empty image. So realistically, I kind of want to be able to grab an image. So I'm going to have to do some sort of cycling through to see if they got a Twitter image or an OG image or whatever image they might have. So let's just grab this array and let's just take it back to our editor for now. So what we need to do is, can I break down what Invoker is? Yes. So Invoker is basically like a quick admin panel. So here's this is our main homepage for what we'd log in with. So we can add a widget. We can say, okay, let's do the category. No, let's get podcasts, and we want to do an average, or we want to do a sum or a count, and we want it to be a number. It's going to be maybe a trend. See what that does. Aggregate by weeks, range, count, name. You can do like popularity or something, and you can save that, and that will go, hey, cool, look at that. You see a nice cool, you can stretch that out, and you can add extra things within it. Then you can go to your models, you can refresh, export, add widget above it. You can get a count above it, like a total value, count, number, save. So I can see how many I've got without having to do too much. Then I can come over to commands and I can say, okay, so let's just run some artisan commands. I can, play with some mails to preview it. I can do the same with notifications, dispatch jobs, enlighten. I don't really know what this does, to be honest. It'll do stuff. And then obviously it's tests, and then whoop, it's got Tinkerwell built in as well. So there's a lot you can do with it. Admin for developers and debugging and stuff. So let's go podcast. Let's get our podcast, and we'll find by this podcast ID. So now we can just do a quick podcast update. So first, let's have a look how we're going to save it. So we can probably want to image there. So I can get the image, get the description. So I can get the data description. So let's go for description first. So we can go data description. Don't need that anymore. We've got a Twitter image there. And we can just like add because we're letting people add the title. So at this point, we need data image. If that is null, then we will go for data OG image. If that is null, we will go for data Twitter image. And if that is null, we will do nothing. So basically, let's just update some of this. So we've got a description, image, 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 or nothing. So it will cycle through for which ones we can use. That's probably the best way to do it right now. I can think of. This is a nice dispatchable job. So we've done that. But now we should probably test it. So if we come back to here and just refresh this, we've got database. So let's just truncate this one. And now we can come back to our job and we can dispatch it again. Ooh. So we got an error. So auto member function update on null. Oh wait, it's because we haven't created it. That's why. Silly Steve. Let's create a new one. Again. Yeah, it's just lots of different arguments. It's not very often that I need it, if I'm completely honest. Transistor.fm. This will be updated. Author is Adam Wathen. There's some copyright information. There's that, and then we can go to fullstackradio.com. The feed URL is this one. So let's drop that in there. We don't want an image and owner created that. We'll just do for now and save. Cool. So now we can dispatch our job because we've got all of that in there. So now if we dispatch, podcast image failed for, okay. It's complaining about something. So why don't we just try and jump on that description there quickly, just see what's complaining about. Description, image, all of that should be fine. But let's figure out what's going on. So we're getting it. We are getting it. Podcast find. Have we got our podcast? Let's make sure we've got our podcast first. Yeah, we've got a podcast. What we'll do, we'll just wrap this in some sort of, if we have a podcast, then we'll do this. Just to stop any potential issues. And also, let's just make sure this is going to work the way we want it to. Dispatch. Okay. Darn it. Something went wrong. Okay, so this might be what's causing the issues. So what I will do to get around this is create a protected function, fetch image which will return a string, and it will take an array of data. And I'll just do a messy version for now, and we will clean it up. And we kind of want that. So we've got an OG image, and we have a Twitter image. Otherwise, we're just going to return null, and we will return string or null. So this will just be this fetch image, where the data is data. Let's just quickly stick that to that, and we'll just do a dispatch. Syntax error. Oh, you could have caught that. Come on, people. Okay, undefined array key. Okay, so we're going to have to do some yucky isset stuff, aren't we? That's probably why it's complaining so much. This is why I don't like working with Open Graph data too much. It can be, it's all very kind of, it might work, it might not work. Okay, so that's got nothing returning. So let's drop that and try again. Dispatch. Why is there a integrity constraint? What sort of field is this? How did I make that? Up over and get the first out, that isn't null. I could do. Let's first see why it's complaining about some integrity constraint on the podcast table. Image. Oh, because it's JSON. I'm trying to stick a string into a JSON column. Okay. Maybe try it this way. Because I know on the feed I can get back more. There you go. That was it. That was it. Empty source. So apparently we're not even getting that back properly, which is rather frustrating. So let's get that podcast back again. Let's just get the data. Encode it if you really need it. I'm casting it to JSON, I believe, so I'm just going to stick it in as an array for now. Have I spelt something wrong on this, on the getting the Twitter image? No, that is exactly what it's called. So if I do that, will it give it me? It does give me it. If I just die and dump on this quickly. It's not returning from here. So I'm assuming it's not liking these one-liners. Let's return there. Return there. I mean, I suppose I could improve this later once I've played around a little bit. It's still just saying no, thank you. So if I get to this bit, and if I just move this dump down to here, it's just dump. I don't know why I just did that. I literally just did what I wanted to and deleted it. So so we're getting it. We are actually getting it. So let's make sure that's coming back correctly. Yes. Database 64. No, it's just move it up. Let it return earlier, just in case something's thrown it off in here. Yeah, for some reason, something was throwing it off, which is really strange. Yeah, that's a bit strange. Sorry, that's probably a bit small as well. I can't actually zoom in on this, can I? View. Can you zoom? You can't zoom on the database one. It's a shame. Right, okay, so we've got it. We've got it now. For some reason, because that was at the end, it was failing because of one of these. So something I'll look into once I've found a good one to test or build a test case around it or something. So we've now updated it. It could be. It's set. I'll probably have to do some. I'll do something with it. Right now, I've got it so it's working for this test case for how I need to use it right this second. So we've got an image for. We've got the image. We've got the description. We've got stuff. So now I can come over to like Tinker, and I can say Caster domains catalog models podcast first. So we've got this. So we're getting, there's a feed, here's a URL. Description's been updated. Spelled that wrong, but that's okay. That's going to be updated later anyway. Got the category of the user, any owner information. So now we've got the podcast. We can start to look at the DTO factory for the podcast itself, so we can kind of skip the manual creation. So I was actually having a play with this command and scroll. What on? No, it doesn't let me zoom in. Right. So let's look at these factories. So the first thing, catalog. Let's create a DTO factory. So we'll create a factories directory within here, and we will create a podcast factory. And let's just start. So we'll start with declaring strict types so that we can be very explicit. The namespace will be caster domain catalog factories. We'll have a class podcast factory, and we'll have a public function static function build. Yeah, they might have. No, I'm pretty sure Table Plus isn't Electron. So here's our podcast factory. And then we're also going to want some data transfer objects. So data transfer objects. And we will create a podcast within here. And this is basically just going to be a very static class style model, really, isn't it? So if we go namespace podcaster, catalog, data, transfer, objects, slash podcast. And the way I like to do these is all within the constructor. So we're going to have, the first thing is, let's have a quick look. Full stack, no, I don't have it. Let's just open Insomnia. Let's just get it the way that I want it. Oh, Invoker. Yeah, I believe I can scroll in Invoker, but it's, yeah, it's been disabled on that specific view. On the models, yeah, it looks like it's been disabled. Right. Oh, that's not what I wanted. This will give me the HTML version, which is fine. Right, this is what we wanted. Here's some useful information on some confirmation stuff for, I can't remember what this was. I was playing with the Company's House API. All right, so let's get, let's add the header of accept application XML. Let's just send that. Let's just grab it how we need it. Let's just copy this and bring it back to our application. Move in here. So there's all of the lovely stuff that we wanted. Scroll to the top. Right, so first thing we're going to need for our podcast is we're going to need, we've got the title. So we're going to public string title. We'll have a public string generator. And I'll probably end up going through and fixing some of these where need be. We'll have a string for the description as well. Get that description. Ooh. Is this Eclipse? No, this is Visual Studio Code, buddy. So language. Let's get the language as well. We're definitely going to need the language. Public string language. Copyright. Public string copyright. And a lot of this is going to look very similar to our database anyway. And the image will be, it's an array for the image for now, I think. Public array image. So category. Let's get the category because we can work with that as well. Oh, no, that is, this is Insomnia. It's really good for sending API requests. And again, oh, yeah, I can zoom in. Yeah, I can just create some really cool little requests. Like I say, you know, this probably won't work, but application JSON. No, it's still giving me XML. Oh, transistor, come on. I suppose it's a feed, not an API. Yes, and it's really good. Okay. Yeah, I use Postman sometimes. It kind of depends what I'm doing, if I'm really honest. Type image summary. Keywords owner. Now let's go back to our database. And what else have we got? External URL, we've got image owner. That's kind of all we need. That is pretty much it. Do we have like got an owner in there? So it's something podcast locked something or other. Owner, iTunes owner. Hey, so we can get the owner. So let's put the public string owner in there too, but what we'll do, we'll move that up to somewhere that makes a little bit more sense. Put it there. So what we're going to do is this is going to return a podcast data transfer object. So we can return a new podcast, and then we'll just fill up the field. So what we need is an array of attributes to be passed in. Thunderclient.io. I've not used that one. I'll have a look for it when I'm not trying to figure everything out. Okay, so here's our podcast factory for creating the data transfer object. We're going to pass through the attributes. And what we're going to be doing to use this is we're basically getting this back as XML. And then we're going to throw this all off to the podcast factory, which will let us start working with it. So we kind of need to look at how we're going to create this. Really, how are we going to call this so we can start playing around and working with it? And I think the idea will be they register, which will hit a controller, which will get the data, which will dispatch a job. Maybe. How's this best going to work? Yeah, I do work with APIs a lot. Yeah. Ooh, okay. So, what's it called? Thunderclient. Let's have a quick look, shall we? Thunderclient. Nope. What is it? Ooh. Ooh. Yes. Cool. That's kind of fun. Thanks for that one, Haz. That's going to be pretty useful. And we can have a play with that. Let's close down some of these tabs, get back to where we were. Okay, we can play with this. Okay, so we need a controller. That's so far we've been working mostly within our domain here, and we've completely ignored any controllers or how we're going to create some of these, how we're going to interact. And I'm going to keep that within the app because that's kind of, well, what the way I see it is that the source, that's a business logic aspect. It's where loads of things are being tracked in the background, and it's not about like interacting with like the HTTP side, your application, how people are going to interface with this application itself. So we're going to create some controllers within here. Yeah, it would have been really good 2 weeks ago, but we'll probably use it when I start working on, building an API and integrating with APIs on this, because I can't build a product without building an API these days. So let's make a controller, and we are going to put this within our app HTTP. It's only really going to have the one entry point right now. Any other entry points, any admin stuff will be under an admin namespace, and anything API related will be under, actually, I suppose I could call it web. We'll call it web, app HTTP controllers, web, podcasts, and this will be a store controller, and this will be invocable. And while we're doing it, we will also go PHP artisan. We'll make another controller, and we're controller. What am I about? We'll make a request. We're going to put this under web, podcasts, store request. So we've got those two created now. So we can come into here and let's just tidy this up a little bit. Give ourselves some more space visually. So let's declare strict types of that. This is going to use a store request, so we can import that one in. We can drop this. That's doing all of that. That's all that magic. We've now gone ahead and let's work on this. This is going to return a ball. Let's drop some strict types into there. Let's clean some of this up. So this is now an array. And when we create a podcast, the only things we're going to need is, I need to tidy the stubs up. So every time I go to do it, I get distracted by something else I needed to do. Let's do something like a max 255 on that one for the title. What else do we actually need? So let's have a look. Create podcast table. So we need the title, we need the author, language. So we need these. So we're going to get the author is required, and it's a string. And again, we don't want it to kill any of our characters in the database, so we'll set a max on that one. Language. So is there any built-in functions for PHP to get the correct language codes? We'll have a look. Or can you validate against language codes in Laravel? Validation options, available rules. So what available rules do we have? We've got a lot of available rules. There's no language. I know there's like a time zone. No, there isn't. We may have to create something later on. For now, I won't worry. Yeah, Joe, good question. So Joe asked, why do you keep the controllers in the default namespace? Is it for convenience since you're using DDD? So what I like to do with the DDD aspect is actually, it's mostly like the back-end logic that is following domain-driven design. And it's, the application itself is how that's the app namespace. That's where we're interacting with this application in the app namespace. But all of the logic sits within its domain where it sits. So I kind of like to split them out that way, so that I know within the source folder, that's where all of the kind of the background stuff's going on, so that I won't have any, any jobs, any models or anything at all within the app directory other than kind of how we're going to interact from a web interface, an API interface, or a CLI interfaces might stay within here, but we'll see. But yeah, it's kind of why I like to do it this way. Personal preference again. So required, and we'll just do string, and we'll look to see what we can do with language codes. We might just have to build something. We're going to want an external URL. External URL is required. And it is also got to be formatted like a URL. And then the feed URL is required. Also got to be formatted like a URL. For an ID. So how do we want this part to work? Hey Isaac, thanks for coming, buddy. It's okay. We've not done too much. I'm probably going to kind of cover over some of what I've already done anyway, as we walk through where we're up to, just to make it a little bit easier. I might change some of these, like the category ID. I'm probably actually going to make that nullable. Ooh, recurred. Yeah, I do typos more than I care to admit, so thanks for spotting that one. Hey, Benjamin. Oh, and John. How do you say your name? I know how to say it if it begins with a B, I think. A B and a J. Right, so we've got the request. We're doing most of what we're doing there. Yearn. Ah, okay, perfect. Thanks. Thanks for teaching me. It's always nice to learn people's names in the way they're meant to say them. Right, can I grab this and can I copy this as an insert statement? Yes, I can. Perfect. So, hey, Alex. Thanks for joining, mate. Alex lives just down the road from me, which is quite cool. Right, we're going to migrate fresh and seed. Have we got any seeders? I set it into production mode for some reason. Let's just, I think I was playing with something earlier. This is local. And again, cool. So I added a seeder, default user seeder. So this is one thing I like to do is create myself a quick user. And what I typically do is wrap this in like a, if we're in a local environment. Ah, that's pretty cool. I've got some, well, my stepkids are half Norwegian, so it's quite interesting. Got lots of cool names on that side of the family. Right. We're going to be finishing those two off soon. Here's our factory, our controller, our store request, all of that's done. So what we need to do is just quickly SQL, let's just insert run. Excellent. And that is there. Right, where were we? We don't need the web right now. We're going to pass that when we come to build it. But then our store controller, we'll get the validated information. So what we need is at this point, we can do something like the authorization. And then we can create our DTO. And then we will be creating our podcast and then returning. So let's step through this. The first step will be our authorization. So we need to create some policies. So again, this is in our domain because it's very specific. But because I haven't updated any make commands or made my own, I will just make a policy. Make a policy, and we will call this podcast policy. So let's just grab this and we'll just move the whole directory right now. Policies, podcast policy. Again, declare script types. I will fix the stubs, I promise. And the namespace is going to be Caster Domains Policies. Handles authorization. We don't really need a constructor. Thanks, Az. Okay, so public function, I'm pretty sure that it's store. Let's go double check the docs. If all else fails, writing policies. So policy. Yeah, we can just do like a create. So create, not store. I'm just checking the naming there. So we can create. We're going to pass through. It would also automatically get the user in there. It should return a bool, and we would, for now, we'll just return true. Like, can they? Yes, we can. But what we'd typically do here is we'd do add a to-do, check if they have a subscription. But this is just part of it. I mean, we're going to have middleware protecting this as well, and we're doing other things to protect it. But I also like to create the policies. So now we've created a policy, we need to go to the auth service provider, and we actually need to register it. So any file I touch, I add script types. I used to do it to absolutely all of them straight away, but it just took too. Void. Why am I typing the name out? It just took too long to get anything done. So on the podcast model, we are going to do the podcast policy. And that is it. That is that hooked up. That is a policy done. So now provider's done, the policy's done. In here, we can just say this authorize and the ability. What am I doing? Ability is create. And we don't need any arguments. We just need to handle that, I believe. Or do I? I'm not sure. I think I might need to pass something through. Can we create policy responses, update, writing policies? I've not used policies in a while. Been too busy in inertia land to remember. So what we'll do, we'll just do, I think we can pass like the podcast policy class maybe. I'll do, because we're not working on inertia right now, I'll just push this to do. So now we can move on to our DTO, which is kind of the point of what we're doing on this stream. So we need our factory, and that will bring back our DTO. So for now, let's just close some of these. We don't need the table. We don't need the request, but we will need the factory. So we will create a DTO by going podcast factory build, and then we're passing in attributes. So our attributes are going to be great podcast, which won't have everything, but we're going to go and work through that. So we'll just say something like request validated for now. Because we want to fill some of the other stuff in the background. Let's see how we're going to do some of this. Right, and then we want to create our podcast. So what we wanted to do, we want to event source parts of this. Like we want to be able to react to changes and track state as time goes on. So this is probably a perfect opportunity to segue into that. Obviously returning later on. He should be sleeping, Has. Well, it's not that late. I suppose it's getting later for you. So, event sourcing. This sparsely package, Laravel event sourcing, is very good. It's very useful. I've used it quite a few times. I've actually written a blog post on using it. I spelled my name wrong. Maybe I should be sleeping, Has. So if I quickly come to my articles, here we go. Embracing the tool stack with event sourcing and a venture into the unknown. So the idea, what I was doing here is using the tool stack and event sourcing at the same time. So we did all of this stuff. So create with attributes, and here's the event sourcing package. And it's just, you create events, you track them, and it's really easy to use. So, feel free to read this article. It's pretty good, if I do say so myself. This is a really easy, walkthrough of how to use event sourcing, but I am going to do it on stream. So let's get started. Installation and setup. Right. 22:55. Mind you, it's 10 to 9 where I am. It's not overly late, but getting later. Right, I'm going to save this, and we are going to save this in our database. Create a new folder, data, and we're going to call this full stack video feed.xml. Close that so we don't lose it next time. We don't want our controller right now because we're going to come back to that, and we'll just close all of this off and we'll come back to it. So let's get event sourcing. Shameless plug, yeah. And here's one I made earlier. So let's just go step through some of this. We can then bring out the migrations. Yeah, we'll migrate now. Don't see why not. And then we can publish the provider, which will give us our configuration. And then we get our default stuff all coming out there, which is great. Dive into the instructions if you want to kind of read through some of that. So there's a few different ways you can use this, and I like using the aggregates. So using aggregates to make a decision. There is a demo app somewhere. There's a Laravel aggregates example on GitHub. Sparsy Laravel aggregates. This one. We'll go to that link there. So here's this one. Let's zoom in a little bit. So the way they've done it, they've kept everything with an app, which is absolutely fine. Do it the way that makes sense to you, right? So here's the domain account, and here is, oh no, this is event source, not event Laravel. So traditional aggregates. This one, app, domain accounts, account aggregate root. So if the other one was using the event source, SAUCE from Frank de Jonge, which is another great package, but it's a little bit complicated to get started with, if I'm completely honest, for anybody who's not used to event sourcing. So let's just go to the model quickly. Are there any changes we need to make on our model first? We're going to have a static UUID. Now, do our podcasts have a UUID? Podcast. We do have a UUID, so we can literally just do the same sort of thing. But what I like, yeah, we'll do it we'll do it as the way it says to do it, because then we can just keep things all the same. So I like to keep relationships at the bottom of my models because I know where to look. So then I can go public static function UUID, functional. And this is going to return a podcast. Or null, I suppose. I suppose it could return null at this point. And we're going to return a static where UUID, and then we're going to pass in a string for UUID is the UUID that we're passing in, and we are going to get first. So returning self there, but I suppose that could return null, if I'm really honest. So I'm gonna be safe and have an optional null on there. So we've updated our model. We've got some things on here which don't look as important right now. So we can come back to that, and let's go back to the aggregate root. So our aggregate root is going to have, it's going to extend their aggregate root, and it's going to have methods which are the events that you call on your aggregate root, and you're going to record a new event happening, basically. Yeah, it kind of does sound like a Spanish name for arrow functions, functino. It sounds like I should be drinking a cappuccino and, be traveling Europe. Right, so aggregate roots, back to it. So our catalog, let's create some aggregates, and we will create our podcast aggregate root. It's a lot to type, so I'm going to copy the name. We'll declare our script types, namespace, caster, catalog, aggregates, extends, aggregate root. Right, so where do we go from here? We don't need to do anything. These aren't important for us right now. We've got limits and the countless hit limit and that sort of stuff. Right now, it's not important for how I need to use it. So what we need to do, we need a public function create podcast. And this is, they pass in the options of string for using it for a name and string for user ID, but I want to pass in DTO. So this is where we will do a podcast data transfer object, and we'll get a podcast, and we're going to return ourselves back, and then this will return this. Then up here, we want to say this record that, and it takes in a domain event, and that's it. We need to create that domain event. We also need to persist that. So let's create our events now as well. So within our catalog, we need to go to create a new folder, and we will call these events, and we will call this a podcast created event. So now we can start building this one out. Script types again, because I like to keep a standard. So caster domains, we'll just go for that, catalog and events, and we're going to have a podcast created event. So we know how this is going to work. So let's go back and have a look at the events. Do they need to extend anything? Should be stored. So extends should be stored, and that's just got to construct. So we can do a public function construct, and this is going to have a public podcast data transfer object as podcast, and that is all this event needs right now. I think we'll see how it goes. A new podcast created, and this is going to take in a podcast, all hooked up with PHP 8, looking lovely, isn't it? Look how nice that looks. It's just beautiful. Okay, so our aggregate root for those imports is going to take in our data transfer object. It is then going to record that this event is going to record this event and persist it to the database. So let's go back to here and let's go have a look at writing, testing, creating and configuring, projectors. Let's have a look. let's have a look. So right in your first projector, here's this, create with attributes, which we don't want, defining an event, passing attributes in, here's an event, money added, money subtracted, account deleted, creating your first projector. So I think we're going to need the projector, I believe. So let's come back to the account projectors. Yeah. So here's our account projector on account created. We're going to take the account created event and the aggregate UUID, which will allow us to then create, and it will just return nothing. So we need to create some projectors to basically hook the event and the aggregate into the model and the database. So new folder, projectors. I mean, Sparsely have got a course coming out next week, I believe, which is probably going to do a much better job of teaching event sourcing than I could possibly do. So we got a podcast projector. I'm just walking through the package in a logical step as we build a fake startup. Domains, projectors, plus that extends projector from that. And this needs to start reacting to events. So on podcast created, that's our event name. So public function on podcast created. When we have saved this podcast created event, basically, we won't return anything, but we take in two options here. So I'm going to create some space so we can see how this works. We're going to take in the podcast created event. We are also going to take in a string for the aggregate UUID. And at this point, we just need to say podcast. Let's make sure we pull in the model here, import the model. And basically, we just need to create it at this point. So that event will have our data transfer object on it. So I think maybe we should call this DTO. So that on this, we're saying the DTO is the podcast. Aggregate the event will take in a DTO argument because it is a DTO. Otherwise, we're going to have podcasts written too many times everywhere and we'll get bored of writing and it'll stop making sense as we do it. So podcast create. So what do we need? Let's go to the fillable. We're going to need that UUID. So UUID, let's just get the aggregate UUID. Perfect. Next, we can have the title. Let's move this over here so it's easier to find. The title is DTO event. The events data transfer object title. Then we're going to have the generator, which will be the event DTO generator. Next, we will have description, which will be the event DTO description. Author, do we get the author in here? Owner and author are kind of the same thing. So we're gonna just stick with that. So owner is event DTO owner, I believe. Yes, owner. So we'll make that author. and we will update the owner maybe if we need to. We'll play around with that part. Copyright is going to definitely come through, so we will get that. Copyright is always something that I would validate with and say, because it's it's not something that we own. This is just us aggregating podcast episodes. So the language is next. So the event data transfer object, we are going to want the language. Then we're going to want the external URL. We've got DTO, and then we want the external URL, which I believe we named like that. No, we haven't put the URL on there, have we? So we're going to want a public string external URL, and the public string feed URL. So we'll get the external URL, and then we're going to want the feed URL, which is the event DTO feed URL. And I think that'll be it for now. The image owner user ID will be passed through as well. So how should we pass this through? Podcast created, there's a DTO, and with the user, when we trigger it, we're also going to want to pass through the current user who is doing it. So we can just kind of pass that through reference. So things are all lining up nicely, which needs to go to here, which will need to take a public user. Although I think maybe the user ID would be better, not the user model, because we don't want to store the entire user model, do we? So that'll be an integer. The user is the user ID. So when we get to the event, we are pulling in an integer for the user, not a model. So the projector have access to it through here. So the user ID will now be the event user, because it's just the ID that we need, and we'll just validate before we even get to that aggregate route, because we'll be passing through the auth ID. So there's our podcast. We've got a UUID, titled, generated description. Other things we might need to work on here is probably a factory. Yep, we can start working on our factory too. So when we come to the podcast, we will need the title is going to be the attributes. Let's grab that, bang. We want the title. The next step is the generator. The generator, then we're going to want the description. Then we're going to want the copyright. Then the owner. Then the language. Image. We're just going to pass through an empty array. Category. We're going to leave that null, I think, because I don't think we're going to get a category at this point. So we might remove that from a DTO for now. Just put that model out of the way. Yeah, we'll drop that from the DTO because we won't have it at this point. So we can drop that. Next one is the external URL, which means we could probably drop image as well because we won't actually have the image. So the external URL is the external URL. This will be coming from our user interface, and then the no quotes, feed URL is the feed URL. Now, Has, thanks for coming, buddy. Really appreciate it. And I will catch you tomorrow, most likely on Twitter. So we have our podcast factory, which will create a data transfer object. It will be triggered by a controller or something of that description, where we are building and grabbing data to send through to the factory to start doing stuff. All of this stuff I'd kind of expect people to pop in. I'd expect them to enter that in a form, perhaps. Like the feed URL, they should know that. The language, they should know that. It'll be a select. The owner will be auto-filled with their name. Hey, Bernard. Thanks for coming, buddy. Copyright, they can add a copyright notice, and all of this stuff they can kind of just add. So there's a factory which will create our data transfer object here, so that our aggregate root will store an event and pass through the podcast data transfer object and integer value for the user ID, which will come from the authentication. So our podcast created event will just store those on it. And then our podcast projector will literally just cycle through and create everything that it was given. There's an owner there. There's an author. We also need the owner when we're creating the model, I believe. So the owner is also the same as the author, basically. But I think on the feed, when we get the feed, this will update to something else. So that will give us everything that we expect. Now we just need to look at registering projectors. So firing off events, account creative attributes, that's not what we want. Welcoming new events, benefits. No, we want to look at registering. Oh, Bernard. So this is a startup. We are building a fictional startup from scratch. It is a podcast hosting, not hosting, it's a podcast kind of aggregate system which allows authors to interact with their audience a bit more. It's very minimal. We're just getting feeds, crawling feeds, and allowing people to kind of subscribe and follow and stuff, and that sort of fun stuff. It is a Laravel application, and we are following domain-driven design. So we need to look at projectors, creating and registering projectors. This is what we need. So we've made it already. We've got that registering. So we need like an event sourcing service provider. And I will put that in the app domain because that is part of our application, not the business logic, which is where I'm keeping most of the domain-driven design stuff. So PHP Artisan, make a provider, and we're going to call it an event sourcing service provider. So before we do much else, let's go to config and make sure we have that loaded here. And let's just expand that class. There we go. So we've got that one. So now we can come back up to our providers, an event sourcing provider. And within here, this is where we're going to register our projections. And let's just void that. And let's just void that. Clean that up. And right, where does it wants it in the register method. So we want to projectionist add projector. So we're just going to add one for now, and we'll look at how we're going to do it later. So projectionist, import that class, believe it's a facade. Yeah. And we want to register just the one for now. So add projector, which takes in one argument, and it doesn't let me see what the name is. So where are we? Projectionist. There's a facade, projectionist. Add projector. Cool. We got the name right here. So we can say that the projector is our podcast projector. And that's it. That is the projector now registered. So that should handle tying in the aggregate route or the factories and all of that together. Creating and configuring. Do we need to do anything in here? Recording events. Persisting aggregates. It should all just work. So what we need to look at next is reactors. So if we go back to our Notion board here for the event storming part. So when a user registers a podcast, it should be saved in the database. We've done that. Job's going to be dispatched. We'll create that job soon. We're also going to want to fetch podcast episodes, and an email is going to be sent. And then we're going to want to send a notification to the admin. So we want to react to parts of these changes. So let's have a look at reactors and see what these are about. It's handling side effects, things like sending a mail or sending a notification. So you only want it to happen when that original event actually happened. So let's say we're doing event sourcing, but if we reset our database or replay our events, then do we want to dispatch all of these jobs and send all of these emails again? Most likely not, because we're replaying the events. So we use a reactor at this point. So let's have a look at these reactors. So should queue reactor on event name. Perfect. So let's do that. So let's just close all of these down and come back to this. So here is our file structure in here. So source, catalog, we've got our aggregates, we've got data transfer objects, we've got events, factories, jobs, models, policies, projectors, we got all of the good stuff. Next, we need a reactors. And this is going to be called, let's go for a name. What should we call it? It's queued. So we could do name suggest. Naming things is so hard as a developer. It's the hardest thing you've got to do. How about we call it fetch podcast meta. Yeah, we're going to fetch meta information about the podcast. We'll call it that for now. We may rename things because naming things is always hard. So we'll quickly declare strict types. Start our namespace as caster domains catalog reactors. And so our fetch meta needs to extend reactor implements should queue. Right. So what we need to do on this is the on event name. So public function on podcast created. What do we get in there? We get an event again. So does this return anything? No, it doesn't. So we can just stick a void on the end of that. So we'll need to get our event, and that'll be the podcast created event. So podcast created event, got the event there. This is very similar to our projection. You tend to name things blur until it becomes clear what it should actually be. I sometimes just do that. I like get lots of test classes and just see what happens. So we've got the event there. And what's going to be in that event? What information is going to be useful? We're going to have the podcast. We are going to want to get meta information about this podcast, right? So first things first, we will just get meta information on podcast from external URL. And then once we've done that, we will, should we have a job dispatching jobs, or is that just too messy? Because the next thing we need to start looking at fetch items. We'll move that to a separate one. We'll dispatch another job to fetch feed items, because we're going to want to fetch feed items often. So we want to dispatch another job that would do that, unless we just create like another reactor. So we're kind of reacting lots, but we'll look at that. We'll look to see if we need to. So fetching the meta information, which is exactly what we just did in our job over here, which is fetching meta information for the podcast. So we could just dispatch this. Is it wrong to dispatch too many jobs in a reactor? I'm not sure. I'd have to ask Freak on that one. To me, it's just a job spawning job, so I don't see it being too killer. At this point, I don't think we've got a podcast ID. That is our main problem, I think. Oh no, we should be able to get it though. We should be able to get it. So our podcast is going to be event UID. Okay, so we can go podcast model, get the UID, and then this will be the event, which is this. We haven't attached the UID onto the event, have we? We're going to have a look at attaching that on here. So we've got, how are we going to do this? Let's go look at the reactors on here to see if they've got any. So reactors, offer loan, more money needed, event. So string aggregate UUID. We're going to need that on our reactor. There's the event. There is the aggregate root, the aggregate UID. So this should just be the aggregate UID. Why is there a string in there? Must be. Right, so aggregate UID, which will allow us to then say podcast ID, and the, I don't need to catch the event at that point if we've already got, no problems, Isaac. we don't really need to catch the event if we're doing it that way and we're doing a lookup there. We're catching the event anyway. I think that's the main thing. So we can just say podcast extern URL. There we go. So fetch the podcast from the aggregate UUID, get meta information, dispatch another job to fetch feed item. So we're dispatching this job. That'll handle just updating stuff. Then we're going to need another job. Yes, I am starting to stream every Tuesday and every Thursday to kind of keep to a relatively good schedule. I find it's going to be maybe a little bit easier doing it that way. There's a reactor. Let's see if we can register a reactor using it. No mail will be sent. Reactors, creating and configuring. Is that what I'm on? Registering, add reactors. So again, we're going to do it this way. So on out, pardon me, providers, event sourcing, we're going to, underneath that, we're going to add a reactor for the fetch podcast meta. Reactor. Cool. So now let's just sort that. So I'm assuming this is called reactor. Yeah, that looks like it's going to make a lot of sense. There might be a nicer way to do some of the registration of some of this because there's going to be quite a few events going. But because it's in the register part, it is all being bound into the container. So it's not like killing the boot too much. So let's look at another job to fetch feed items. And then once we've fetched some feed items, I might call it a night. I've got a brand new Xbox that I might want to play. So let's create another one and we will call this one fetch podcast items. So we'll declare strict types there, namespace, caster, domains, jobs. Ooh, am I now? Am I? Thank you. Good spot, that person. Good spot, Len. Yes, I did. I missed the R. Thank you. Right, okay. So we'll just say class for now, and we'll kind of just say, right, okay. We want to implement should queue, and then we're going to want basically all of that again. And then going to bring in the traits. Eventually we'll go through and clean up the ones we're not going to be using. Then when we construct this, we're going to pretty much want this exactly the same. We want the podcast ID and we're going to want the feed URL instead. So then when we handle it, this is where we're going to get stuff. So what this is going to do, fetch podcast meta. So let's come down to here and say fetch podcast items dispatch. And this is going to have the podcast ID passed in and then the podcast feed URL passed in. So basically this reactor is basically just going to grab the podcast by the aggregate UUID. It is going to then dispatch two separate jobs. One of them is going to update the meta information for the podcast. So we can crawl the website they've provided and just update things like the description and an image and that sort of thing from the Open Graph settings. And then the fetch podcast items will be dispatched, which will start crawling and getting all of a nice little the podcast episodes, which we haven't even got a database model for yet, but we'll get around to that. So podcast items, fetch data for podcasts. Don't need that one. Event sourcing service provider. Don't need that right now. Podcast created. So podcast created on the aggregate route here. We're going to let's look at the our aggregate route and see what our options are going to be, because we should have a UUID at some point. Could we generate the UUID, send it into that? Because we're not actually getting the UUID for any of these. We're not using any of them. So let's go have a look at the events. So money added. It's got an int being passed through. Account created. It's got some basic stuff. Money subtracted. More money needed. We're not passing any IDs into there. And the projector, account projector, it looks like it's automatically being passed in. So that looks like it'll be fine. It sounds like it's just going to work. It's weird not seeing it kind of tied anywhere. We've got the aggregate UUID there. We've got the event, and I suppose we're just going to also pass through the aggregate UUID to the reactor as well. Looking at the examples, obviously. So this isn't technically needed, but it looks like it's being bound and passed through anyway. So we'll grab that, we'll do that, then we'll do this. What I'm thinking with the fetch podcast items is I'm going to be calling this a lot. I can use like the Laminus feed package that I used last time, or I could just use HTTP client. What's wrong with just using a HTTP client? Just grab the XML and just do stuff with it. So let's just look at this. So we're going to pass that, and then what we're going to want to do is we're going to get the feed. And to get the feed, we're just going to do let's make sure we pull in the facade. I'm going to export with headers, and we are going to have the headers as an array, and within there we're going to accept the application XML, because if we do text HTML, that will just tell us where to go. And then we're going to get, and get takes an argument of URL. I should know this because I've built a package around this. And then that is going to be this feed URL. So there is our feed. Instead of using a reader package, we're just going to use HTTP to get it. So let's simple XML load string feed. Save XML. No, that's CJSON. Let's see how that works. Back to Invoker. Time to invoke some magic. Some jobs. Let's just refresh this. Fetch data for podcast. Okay, let's restart Invoker because it's not wanting to see stuff. Right. Caster jobs, caster domains, catalog jobs, fetch podcast items, podcast ID 1. And then from here, we can just grab that feed URL, pop that into there and dispatch. Bang. Oh, file name must be type of string, null given. Okay, so before we get to that point, let's organize these windows again because we don't need Safari right now. Let's just die and dump on feed JSON and see what it gives us. Close that, dispatch again. Ooh, null. Okay, before that, we will just get this feed URL. Yeah, it's giving us feeds for that. So let's just have a look at the feed itself. Dispatch. We're getting a 200 response, which is great. So we can do something like if, we'll call that response because it's HTTP. We've got to name things nicely. So if response failed, then throw the response to exception. Otherwise, we're just going to let's go look at the HTTP client. I'm used to just getting JSON, so it's quite strange not being able to get JSON HTTP client. Making requests. We got those testing. So dumping requests, getting headers, authentication, bearer, timeout, retries, error handling, throwing exceptions. Oh, I can just say response throw. That's a nice one. Guzzle options, concurrent requests, testing, faking, fakety fake, inspecting requests, events. Okay. Digging deeper. Where's the response? Okay, so we'll have to have a look at get HTTP client response. So let's just go have a look at that, shall we? Vendor, Laravel, framework, source, illuminate, HTTP, client, and we're going to have a response. So we can just get the body. Let's just see how that looks. I think you can call DD. I believe you might be able to. We've renamed it response body. Let's just have a look at the body of the response. Bang. We've got some XML. It's as a string. So if we just do a simple XML load string, dispatch again, we've now got XML element. We can now turn this into an array because arrays are nicer to deal with. Bam, we've got an array, we've got attributes, and we can start doing stuff. I think you can remove the, yeah, I probably can. It turns this and it flows. It flows it for you from the looks of it, which is good. Cool. So we have got the feed is now this. So now we can do some stuff with the feed itself. So let's just collapse parts of this down that we don't need. So we've got our feed. First thing to do with our feed is get the channel. Channel is feed channel. Let's do a dive dump on channel and see what it gives us. Because of its XML, it's XML embedded in XML and it starts to get really messy. Cool. We can cast that again to an array. There's got to be a nicer way to work with some of these feeds, because I've even got to do this in other packages. Right, okay, so we can start to update this. We can go title generator. We can update a lot of stuff on our podcast itself. So the first thing we'll do is update our podcast with feed data, as this is more accurate. So podcast equals and in our constructor we pass through the podcast ID. This podcast ID. If no podcast, then we will throw a new, we'll just throw runtime exception saying that the podcast with an ID of does not exist anymore. So it's been deleted basically at this point. So we're handling that issue that might happen. We've got that. So now we can podcast update some other fields. So from our channel, we are going to get the generator. We can get the correct generator. So we can redo the description so that it matches. It will match the brand in other areas, which means that we can make the description nullable on the model itself. Channel description. We can also grab that copyright, update that copyright information, which means we can make something else nullable, which is, it's lowering the effort it's going to take for people to get started. Then with the language as well, language, we can get the, I get the feeling we use channel a lot, so let's just copy that. Language. Don't need the external URL because we've already worked with that. The image. Okay, I suppose we could get the image out separately. Channel image. I could just drop image because it's an array already. We got, then we're directly into the items, which is great because now we've updated the podcast. If it's been deleted since this job's ran for any reason, we're just going to stop. And now we can work with our podcast episodes. So to do that, we need to go PHP artisan, make a new migration, create episodes table, and we're going to create episodes. So I'm doing just a migration because I'm going to create the model directly in here because of working with make command. So we'll declare strict types within here, namespace caster models. Oh, it's not shared though, is it? It's catalog. Class episode extends model. And that's where stuff will go in there. So in our database, in our migrations, we can now start to build up these episodes using the data that we know we're going to get from a feed. So let's come back to here. We're getting a channel item. Let's just do channel item. Let's see what it does. For now, we're just going to comment that out because we don't want to work with anything just yet. We want to do that in a bit. We've got an item, which is an array of XML from the looks of it. It still is. Okay, we will do it this way. So we are going to collect all the items. Then we're going to map over each item. To start with, we are going to get an episode and we are going to cast it, the item, to an array. And for now, we will just do a quick down dump on the episode. Ooh. Let's see how that looks. Perfect. So we've got the title. We've got a link somewhere else. We've got like an external link. We've got a link to share it, a description, published, author, and enclosure, which will be all of like the media stuff. So we can now start with our database. So table string, oh, not string, we will make a UUID. And then table string title. Description is also a XML element, which looks like it's going to be too big to spit out there. So we've got the title. So we'll also go for table. We'll go medium text because sometimes show notes can be large. And it's got links in it, so we're going to want to render that as HTML, and we want them to be able to tweak it if need be. So we've got a title, we've got the description. We'll add the author again, but I don't see the need for it. But for shared podcasts, I suppose sometimes it might be needed. We have got the table string external URL again. Got another external URL. That is great. And we have also got an external ID, which we can use to check against later. I can't make that unique though, because it could be from multiple sources. We can do a table timestamp for published at, and then before that external stuff, we're going to have a, I'll do it like a JSON column for the media. So that is all of that. So now I can just come through and quickly add these protected fillable attributes. So we're going to have a UID, we're going to have a title, we're going to have a description, UID, title, description, author, media. We will also have external information, so the external URL, which is like the share link from Transistor, then the external ID, which is the ID reference to it, and then we're going to have a published at as well, and then we're going to want to do some casting. So protected casts, we are going to have media is going to be as array object, then the published at is going to be date time. What I'm also going to add is a way to override. Yeah, I'm on team fillable all the way, mate. I'm going to add a Boolean as well with a default of false. And this is going to be archived so that the author can actually just archive it if he doesn't want it to be displayed on the platform for any particular reason. So we also need to add in, what's that after, before published at. So archived. So now we need to add an archived, which is a Boolean. Right, okay, so that is just an episode, but it still needs to link back to table foreign ID for the podcast ID, and this will be constrained, and on delete we will cascade just in case. So basically what we're doing there is we're just doing a quick cheat around way to do foreign keys. We're constraining it and we're saying, okay, if the podcast is deleted, I want the episodes to also say bye-bye. So podcast ID, which means I can now public function podcast, and this is a belongs to, and we'll say return this belongs to, and the related model is a podcast, and the foreign key is the podcast ID, which means I can come to the podcast and I can also hook that up. So public function episodes has many, return this has many, and the related is the episode class, and the foreign key is the podcast ID. So that is all of that. If I come back to this fetching stuff, can I do a quick die and dump on channel again? Just because I just realized something. We haven't got a category, so we're going to have to make them choose a category because it also isn't in any of this information. It seems to be hidden in the XML for iTunes only from the looks of it. So that's a bit of a shame. So we've got all of that. And at this point, we're going to event sourcing, create an episode. So there's the database for that. That is all looking good. The episode is all looking good. Podcast, we're fetching items here. Everything is looking like how I would expect it. So it is almost 10 o'clock here in the UK. I've done quite a lot. I might call it a day. I'm probably going to pick this up again on Tuesday next week, episode 3. So git add, we're just going to do a nasty old work in progress commit. Stream 2. Load of event sourcing and DTOs and jobs for working with podcasts and episodes. Good push. So I hope you found it useful. I feel like I've flown through a lot of this, but I also feel like I've been really slow at the same time. Ooh, I don't actually need open graph. That's great. I can delete that. Let's do a quick tidy up on that one. So let's just git add, git commit, removing unused class from use statement. Good push. Yeah, that was fun. Next time, I think I will be looking to carry on from where we are. Let's go to README. We've done that, we've done that, and we've done that. Artisan command we need to do. So next time, we want to be looking at processing podcast episodes, which means we need to create an artisan command for fetching episodes. So these are kind of related, and that's going to be quite a big topic to go over because we're looking at a scheduler, we're looking at quite a few little parts there, and we're going back over some event sourcing for this part. So I think it'll be useful to keep it minimal on those two and go into a bit more detail. So we'll just update the README there. We can push that. There we go. That is all up on. Here we go. It's all up on GitHub. Feel free to clone it, download it, play with it, leave issues, PR it, whatever you might need. And I shall catch you all Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in.